The jungle has a way of swallowing sound, not just muffling it, but consuming it entirely, as if the green walls of vegetation are hungry for anything that disturbs their ancient silence. In the dense rainforests of the Philippines, where the canopy grows so thick that noon looks like twilight, you learn quickly that nature doesn't just surround you, it watches you. And sometimes, something else watches too. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres had been in the jungle for 11 days when he first felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the instinctive awareness that comes from a million years of human evolution telling you that you're prey. He'd felt it before in Afghanistan, moments before an ambush. But this was different. This feeling didn't come from the world he knew. It came from somewhere else entirely. It was August 2011, and Torres was leading a small Marine Force recon team on what the official paperwork called a joint training exercise with Filipino forces in Mindanao. But Torres had been in the Corps long enough to know that joint training exercise was code for something else. They were looking for something that had gone missing 3 weeks earlier, a research team that had vanished without a trace. The team consisted of 5 men. Torres himself, a 34-year-old career Marine from El Paso, Corporal Danny Wright, 25, a sharp-witted Georgian, Staff Sergeant Luis Cardona, 31, who could navigate any terrain blindfolded, Lance Corporal Jake Morrison, 22, their communications specialist, and Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Reed, 38, their liaison with Filipino military intelligence. Reed had briefed them before insertion. 3 weeks ago, a research team went into the jungle. 4 civilians, 2 Filipino Army escorts. They were investigating reports of archaeological ruins. After 24 hours of silence, a search team went in, found their camp, all their equipment, no people. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just gone. That should have been Torres's first warning that this mission was wrong, but orders were orders. They'd been inserted by helicopter at dawn, dropped into a clearing 10 kilometers from the last known location of the research team. The plan was simple: reach the site, document everything, look for survivors, extract by nightfall. But the jungle had other plans. The terrain was brutal from the start. Progress was measured in meters per hour rather than kilometers. The humidity turned the air into something you had to chew before you could breathe. But it wasn't just the physical challenge that was wearing on them. It was the silence. In a jungle this alive, there should have been noise. Birds, insects, monkeys, something. Instead, there was only the sound of their own breathing, their own footsteps. Even when they stopped to rest and listened, there was nothing. Just that suffocating, watchful silence. Cardona noticed it first. This isn't right. Where are the animals? They pressed on, following GPS coordinates. But as the hours passed, Torres began to notice something else that bothered him. The vegetation was changing abruptly, as if they were crossing invisible barriers. And then Cardona found the trees with markings, bark covered in patterns of grooves that looked almost deliberate, like someone had carved symbols into them. But the grooves were old, grown over, part of the trees themselves. Marker trees, Reed said, examining them closely. Indigenous people used to mark trails this way, but I've never seen patterns like this. These trees are probably 200-300 years old, and the marks are part of their growth. Someone carved them when the trees were young. The patterns were geometric, repeating sequences that were too regular to be natural. Triangles within circles within squares, spiraling inward toward a center point. And when Torres looked around, he saw the same patterns on other trees, creating a corridor of marked trunks leading deeper into the jungle. By late afternoon, they reached the coordinates. The jungle had opened into a clearing, roughly circular, perhaps 50 meters across, and in the center stood ruins unlike anything Torres had seen before. The structure was built from massive stone blocks, each one easily weighing several tons, fitted together with precision that seemed impossible for ancient construction. The blocks were covered in those same geometric carvings, creating designs that seemed to shift and move when you looked at them from different angles. But what stopped Torres cold was the shape of the structure. It wasn't built up, it was built down. The ruins were the entrance to something underground, a stone staircase descending into darkness, flanked by pillars covered in more of those unsettling carvings. "What is this place?" Wright breathed. Reed was already documenting everything with his camera. "This isn't in any historical record I've ever seen. The architecture doesn't match any known culture in the Philippines." Torres found the research team's camp near the tree line. Tents still standing, equipment neatly arranged, a cold fire pit in the center. It looked like they had stepped away for a few minutes and just never came back. Personal items were still in place. A laptop sat on a folding table, its battery dead. Research notes were scattered around, covered in sketches of the ruins. Cardona picked up a notebook, flipping through pages of increasingly frantic handwriting. "Listen to this. Day 3. The patterns are not random. They're a language or a map or both. But there's something else. The locals won't come near this place. They call it Pugad ne Natutulog, the nest of the sleeping ones. They say it should never be opened." "Opened?" Wright repeated. Cardona continued reading. "Day 5. We've cleared the entrance. The stairs go down at least 30 meters. Tomorrow we descend." Reed had found another journal belonging to one of the Filipino army escorts. His face was grave as he read. "Day 6. They went down this morning. We're supposed to wait here, but it's been 8 hours and they haven't come back up. We can hear them though. We can hear them singing." Singing? Torres felt that cold feeling return. Day 7. Lieutenant Santos went down to find them. He's been gone for 4 hours. I can hear him now too. They're all singing together, but the words don't make any sense. "I'm leaving. I don't care about court-martial. I'm leaving this place." Reed closed the journal. That's the last entry. Morrison tried to raise their command on the radio. Nothing but static. "Sir, it's like there's interference, but my equipment shows full functionality. There's just nothing out there." They were cut off, alone in a clearing that had swallowed 6 people without a trace. "We stick to the mission," Torres said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Reed, Wright, secure the perimeter. Cardona, Morrison, you're with me. We're going down those stairs, but not deep, just far enough to see what we're dealing with." They prepared quickly. Flashlights checked, weapons loaded, a rope secured to one of the pillars. Torres went first, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The stairs were steep and narrow, walls pressing in on both sides. The carvings covered every surface, growing more complex as they descended. Simple geometric shapes gave way to more elaborate designs. Scenes depicting figures that were humanoid but wrong, with too many limbs or heads that split into multiple branches. Celestial bodies arranged in patterns that didn't match any sky Torres had ever seen. And everywhere, those spiral patterns that seemed to draw your eye inward. "How far down are we?" Cardona asked. "Maybe 20 meters. The stairs keep going." "You hear that?" Morrison whispered. Torres stopped, held his breath, listened. Faint but unmistakable. Singing. Not voices exactly, but something like voices. Rising and falling in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves. The stairs ended at a doorway covered in carvings. Beyond was a chamber massive enough to be a cathedral, carved entirely from bedrock. The ceiling soared overhead, lost in shadows. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in more carvings, creating a 3-dimensional map of something that wasn't Earth. But what dominated the chamber was what stood in its center, a series of concentric rings made from stone, arranged vertically one inside the other, creating a sphere that hung suspended in the air with no visible support. And around the rings, positioned at specific points, were 6 figures. The research team. They stood motionless, their backs to the entrance, facing the suspended stone sphere. They weren't bound, weren't visibly injured. They just stood there, perfectly still, while that impossible singing filled the air. "Dr. Chen," Torres called out, "this is the United States Marine Corps. We're here to extract you." None of the figures moved. The singing continued. "Sir, this is really wrong," Morrison said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to get them and leave now." Torres moved forward slowly. As he got closer, he could see details that made his skin crawl. Their clothes were torn and filthy. Their exposed skin was covered in scratches and what looked like the same geometric patterns from the walls, carved into their flesh. But most disturbing were their eyes, open, unblinking, reflecting his flashlight like animal eyes caught in headlights. "Dr. Chen, can you hear me?" The singing changed, grew louder, more intense. Torres realized with horror that the sound was coming from the figures themselves. And then one of them spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice came from one of the Filipino army escorts, spoken in a monotone, his eyes still fixed on the stone sphere, his expression utterly blank. "We're here to bring you home," Torres said. "This is home. This has always been home. Before the jungle, before the islands, before the world above. This is where we began. This is where we'll end." Who's we? The sleeping ones, the first builders, the ones who mapped the stars before stars had names. We built the circles, we carved the patterns. We left warnings for those who would disturb our rest. The escort's head turned impossibly far, rotating far beyond what human anatomy should allow. His eyes locked onto Torres's, and in them, Torres saw depths that shouldn't exist. Infinite darkness, populated by lights that moved with intention. Torres turned to retreat and found Cardona and Morrison standing frozen in the doorway, their weapons lowered, their eyes fixed on the stone sphere. Behind them, Reed and Wright were descending the stairs, moving with mechanical precision, drawn by something they couldn't resist. He was alone, the only one still himself. The figures began to move, turning in unison to face him. They formed a circle around him, their eyes all reflecting that same infinite darkness. "You're different," they said in chorus. "You're resistant, strong. You would make an excellent guardian." Guardian of what? Of the seals, of the boundaries, of the doors that must remain closed. The figures raised their arms, pointing toward the sphere. "This is one of 7, built when your kind was young, placed at points where the fabric grows thin. We've been sleeping, maintaining the seals through our dreams, holding back what lies beyond. But seals weaken, dreams fade. We need new guardians." Teresa's back hit the wall, the carvings pressed against him, warm and pulsing. And through his contact with the wall, images flooded his mind, visions of the world as it had been countless ages ago, when something else had lived here first. Not human, but conscious, vast, alien. They had built cities that defied geometry and eventually torn holes in reality itself. But they had been careless. They had opened doors that shouldn't be opened. And something had noticed. Something immense and hungry had invaded, consuming their civilization completely. The survivors had built the seals, 7 great structures at 7 locations, creating a network of containment to keep the invaders trapped in the spaces between spaces. But maintaining the seals required consciousness, required guardians who would dream the boundaries into continued existence. The first builders had given themselves to the seals, descended into chambers and surrendered their physical forms to become eternal dreamers, holding the doors closed through the force of their sleeping minds. Generation after generation, millennium after millennium, they had slept and dreamed and held the line, until their dreams grew weak, until they needed to be replaced. Therese pulled away from the wall, gasping. The figures watched him with expressions that might have been pity. "You understand now. The seal must be maintained.
The door must remain closed. Someone must dream the boundary. Will it be you? Will you join us? Or will you leave and doom your world when the seal finally fails? Therese looked at his team, good men standing mindless and controlled. He couldn't let them be sacrificed. He couldn't let them be trapped in an eternal nightmare because he was too afraid to take their place. He lowered his rifle. Let them go. I'll do it. I'll be your guardian. The singing shifted, became almost gentle. You are worthy. Your sacrifice matters. Therese pulled out his notebook and scribbled quickly. If you're reading this, I made a choice. Don't look for me. Don't come back. Tell my family I died in the line of duty. Tell them I saved lives. It's true, even if they'll never know how many. Some doors need to stay closed. SFC, Michael Therese. He pressed the page into Morrison's hand. Then he walked forward, stepped into the circle of figures, and faced the suspended rings of stone. What do I do? Step forward. Enter the sphere. Let go. Therese took a breath, his last as a fully independent being, and stepped through the rings. The world inverted. Suddenly, he wasn't looking at the rings from outside. He was looking out from inside. He could see the chamber, see his team, see his own body standing like an empty shell. But he could also see beyond it, through the stone, through the earth, through space and time itself. He saw the other seals scattered across the globe, ancient structures in the Amazon, buried beneath Siberian ice, drowned in the Pacific, hidden in the Australian outback, sealed beneath Antarctic ice, lost in the Sahara, and at each site, other guardians who had made the same choice, all linked in a web of dreaming vigilance. And he saw what they were holding back. It had no shape human perception could process. It was hunger given consciousness, chaos given purpose, the antithesis of existence itself. It pressed against the seals constantly, searching for weakness. Without the guardians, it would tear through and consume everything. Therese understood then the true weight of what he'd agreed to. This was eternal. He would exist in this state, holding the door closed until the universe itself ended. But as he connected with the other guardians, felt their combined will reinforcing the seals, he also felt pride, purpose, the certainty that this mattered more than anything. He was saving the world, every moment of every day, for the rest of time itself. Back in the chamber, the figures were stirring, consciousness returning to them, memories being erased. Morrison blinked, looked around in confusion. Sergeant Therese? What happened?
But Torres wasn't there anymore. His body stood motionless within the rings, eyes open but unseeing. Already stone was growing over him, incorporating him into the structure forever. "We need to get out of here," Reed said, his voice hoarse. They tried to reach Torres, tried to pull him free, but the stone was already too thick. Within minutes, all that remained was a vague human shape within the rings, and even that was fading. The team retreated, stumbling up the stairs in shocked silence. They reached the surface as the sun was setting, and as they emerged, everything changed. The radios crackled to life, birds sang in the trees, the jungle sounds returned all at once. "Blackout 3, this is Command. What's your status?" Reed picked up the handset with shaking hands. "We found the research team. They're alive, but disoriented, requesting immediate medevac." "And your team? 6 Marines extracted?" Reed looked at his men. He understood with sudden clarity that some truths couldn't be spoken. "Negative, Command. We're 5 Marines. Sergeant Torres was KIA. Structural collapse in unstable ruins. Body is unrecoverable. Copy that. Medevac inbound. Command sends condolences. The helicopter extracted them. As they flew over the jungle, Reed looked down at the clearing, at ruins already being reclaimed by vegetation. In months, they'd be covered completely. In years, forgotten entirely. The team was debriefed separately. Their stories were simple. They found the research team suffering from exposure. Torres had died in a collapse. The site was too dangerous for investigation. The report was filed, the site was classified, and the 4 Marines were given orders never speak about the mission to anyone. Violation would result in court-martial. Before they separated, Reed held up the paper Torres had written. He knew what he was doing. He made a choice so we wouldn't have to. That's leadership. That's sacrifice. And that's something we can never talk about. But people should know, Morrison protested. His family should know he's a hero. His family will know he died serving his country. That has to be enough. Reed struck a match and burned the paper, letting the ashes scatter. We carry this burden. We honor his memory by living well, by keeping the secret he died to protect. Years passed. The 4 Marines went separate ways, pursued separate lives, but none of them ever spoke about that day in the jungle. And in the Philippines, deep in a forgotten chamber, a guardian dreams. He holds the door closed. He maintains the seal. He saves the world with every sleeping moment, and will continue to do so until time itself ends. Michael Torres died saving humanity from a threat it will never know existed. He became something eternal, something heroic in ways that can't be measured or rewarded. And 4 Marines were ordered never to speak about what they saw, carrying a burden that will haunt them forever, knowing that somewhere their sergeant is still on duty, still standing watch, still protecting everyone from horrors beyond imagination. That's the price of being a guardian. That's the cost of true sacrifice. And that's a story that will never be told.